The alarms always sounded louder at night. Monitors chirped in uneven rhythms. A stretcher rattled over tile. Somewhere close to the ambulance bay, a radio crackled with clipped EMT slang and a brief burst of static. The air in Mile High General's emergency department smelled of bleach-burned coffee and the thin metal scent of dried blood. Under the hard white light, people blurred into movement. Scrubs, lab coats, blankets, plastic. Voices layered on top of each other in fragments. BP's dropping. Where is respiratory? Family is asking for someone to explain. Through it all, Nora Quinn moved without a sound. She pushed a medication cart down the main corridor, navy blue scrubs, a little too big for her narrow frame. Her hair was pulled into a low knot at the nape of her neck, brown and plain and practical. The only sharp thing about her at a glance was the line of her jaw when she clenched it. Her gloves snapped into place with a small, quick sound. Not loud enough to interrupt anyone, just loud enough for her to feel it. A private signal that her hands were ready. She slid past a resident, backing out of a room without either of them colliding. She pivoted around a tech who suddenly turned. She anticipated a gurney cutting across the hallway before its wheels even squealed. If anyone noticed how easily she threaded through the chaos, they did not show it. A voice cut through the noise from the central desk. Quinn, charts. Dr. Simon Klein stood at the computer station, shoulders hunched over a glowing screen. He did not look at her as he spoke. He simply waved 2 fingers at a stack of paper on the counter the way someone might gesture at a box needing to be moved. I need someone who can handle the front end of trauma, not admin. Nora stopped the cart, set the brake with her foot, and stepped closer. Yes, doctor, she said. Her voice was low even. It did not carry. She gathered the charts, fanned them quickly to see which patients were missing signatures, which orders had time-sensitive medications. Klein was already calling for someone else. Garcia with me in Bay 3. We have a real case. He brushed past Nora, a gust of cologne and impatience. She shifted half an inch to give him room and then vanished back into motion. The ER was a grid in her mind. Supply closets, suction outlets, spare oxygen tanks, locker numbers, the quirks of each monitor, which ones dropped, signal which ones lied. As she walked, she checked small things without announcing it. She tugged on the clear tubing of a wall suction canister. The seal held. Good. She spun an oxygen knob on a portable tank, listened to the faint hiss before turning it off again, full. She opened a drawer on her cart. Syringes pre-filled epinephrine saline. Line flushes neatly lined up. The labels faced forward not in rainbow order, but in an order only she seemed to understand. Highest risk at the front, fastest access at the back. At bed 9, an elderly man clutched the rail with spotted knuckles, chest rising too fast. His eyes darted between the digital numbers above him and the wild movement in the hallway. They're too busy, he whispered to no one in particular. Nobody's coming. Nora stepped into the room. The monitor by his head beeped in a staccato pattern, erratic but not yet dangerous. The fluorescent light gave his skin a yellow sheen. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale fear. She took the rail gently. I'm here, Mr. Carter. He squinted at her badge. Do I know you? Not yet, she replied. Take a breath with me. She did not mention his oxygen saturation. She did not lecture him about anxiety. She simply breathed slow and exaggerated counting quietly, so only he could hear. After 3 cycles, the line on the monitor began to settle. The beep found a more regular rhythm. There you go, she said. Better. His grip on the rail loosened. His eyelids fluttered. You're very quiet, he murmured. That helps you hear yourself, Nora said. She turned his monitor alarm down a notch, not enough to silence it, just enough to soften the shrill edge. Then she adjusted his blanket, smoothed a wrinkle near his feet, and stepped back out into the hallway. Quinn. The second voice came sharper, brighter from near the crash cart at the far end. Dr. Tyler Blake Hare, still too perfect for a night shift, leaned against the red metal cart like it was a bar. He tapped one of the drawers with a pen. You color-coding the apocalypse again? He asked. This is an ER, not a missile silo. Nora walked up, eyes flicking over the drawers to check they had not been disturbed since her last pass. Everything was still in place. For now. If the power goes out, she said, you will find what you need in the dark. Blake snorted. That a threat or a fortune cookie? He smiled at his own joke and moved away without waiting for an answer. A young nurse nearby laughed a thin, awkward sound. Only Manny Rodriguez, wiping down a nearby stretcher, watched Nora as she closed one of the drawers with her fingertips. He had been in his 40s when his knees gave out in the desert years back. The VA put him behind a mop instead of a rifle. His back was wider now, hair thinner, but his eyes had not lost the habit of recognizing tension in a room. He saw the way Nora's gloved hand lingered for half a second on the handle, how her shoulders rose just a fraction then fell, how she scanned the corridor not for gossip but for angles and exits. He muttered under his breath to a new hire, folding blankets beside him. "That is not OCD," he said. "That is deployment." The new hire glanced at him, then at Nora, then rolled her eyes like she had heard one war story too many. "She freaks out when things get loud," the girl whispered back. "People say she freezes." Manny did not argue. He just went back to wiping cloth moving in tight, efficient circles. An alarm shrieked from Trauma Bay 2. "Motor vehicle collision," someone shouted. "ETA 2 minutes." Suddenly the hallway became narrower. Staff peeled away from walls, some moving with purpose, some hesitating. The air seemed to tighten like before a thunderstorm. Nora reached for her gloves again, even though she was already wearing a pair. The habit was so deep, her fingers searched for elastic. That was not there. She recognized the impulse, flexed her hands once, then pushed her cart toward the supply room. By the time the ambulance doors crashed open, she was at the trauma bay doorway. A man in his 20s lay strapped to a backboard leg, twisted at an angle that defied bone. Blood soaked through the temporary dressing over his thigh. The paramedic rattled off numbers as they rolled him in. High-speed rollover, no airbags. Open femur fracture, uncontrolled bleeding on scene fluids, running en route. The room filled quickly. Klein snapped on a gown, calling orders without looking up. "Pressure dressing another 18-gauge AFear. I want imaging as soon as possible." Nora did not step fully inside. She stood in the frame shadows at her back, watching the monitors, the mess, the frantic hands. Her body wanted to move forward. Her mind had already laid out the instrument tray for a traction splint. It had already chosen the size, the angle, the amount of countertension. She saw a nurse fumbling with the equipment, unfamiliar with the straps. The traction unit sat on the counter, still collapsed. Nora slipped around the far side of the bed where there was just enough space for one person. She reached for the splint, popped the lock, extended it in a smooth motion, and dialed the setting to the number her brain had calculated the moment she saw the leg. When Klein turned for it, his hand met the bar exactly where it needed to be. He paused for a heartbeat, then grabbed it. "Who prepped this?" he asked, distracted. Nobody answered. The only reply was the rustle of gowns, the hiss of oxygen, the monotonous sound of the blood pressure cuff inflating. "Do not anticipate," Klein snapped as he fitted the splint. "Wait for orders. You are not the one cutting." Nora stepped back as if the words had a physical weight. She kept her eyes on the patient's face, not on Klein. She watched the color of the man's lips, the way his chest moved. Her jaw tightened once, then she retreated to the threshold again, the edge of light stopping at her shoes, the rest of her swallowed by the hallway. Behind her, monitors kept time, beep, beep, beep. In front of her, the room swarmed around someone who did not even know her name. Nora turned her head, scanning the corridor for the next call light, the next alarm, the next small thing she could fix where no one was looking. She pushed the cart away from the trauma bay wheels, whispering over tile, her gloves already reaching for the next task. The motor vehicle case rolled toward radiology, trailing a damp line of saline and blood on the floor. The noise in trauma bay too settled into a low murmur, the hiss of oxygen, the soft clack of keyboard keys, the rustle of plastic as someone tied off a trash bag. Nora wiped the edge of the doorway, where a gloved shoulder had left a streak of red. She sprayed the disinfectant once, twice, then once more for herself. The smell of chemicals bit the air. Behind her, Klein dictated into the computer. "Open femur fracture splint applied vitals stabilized on arrival." He did not mention that the splint had been pressed into his hand at the exact tension he needed. He did not mention who had said it. Nora did not expect him to. She dropped the used wipe into the biohazard bin and pushed her cart away from the trauma bay. As she moved, she reset small things that had drifted out of line during the rush. A stool crooked in the middle of the hallway, a blood pressure cuff coiled in a knot, an IV pole leaning at an angle. Each item found its place with a quiet click or soft thud. At the clean utility room, she pressed her badge to the reader and slipped inside. The noise of the ER muffled behind the door. It was cooler in here. Rows of shelves climbed the walls stacked with gauze tubing, sterile packs, vacuum-sealed kits. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. She scanned the racks the way someone else might scan the horizon. Top shelf left chest tube trays, 3 of them, one short. She made a note in her head, not on a clipboard. Middle Ivor start kits, saline flushes, alcohol swabs. She opened a box, checked the expiration date without really needing to. Her eyes had already done that math. Near the floor, tourniquets narrow and wide. She nudged one box straight with the back of her wrist. Her hands moved automatically, reorganizing what other people called good enough into something that would not fail in a blackout. Sharpie lines on cardboard marked which side opened fastest. Certain items sat at shoulder height rather than ankle or overhead, not to look pretty, but to be reachable when someone was kneeling beside a bed with both knees in someone else's blood. Manny's voice floated through the open doorway. "You in there, Quinn?" "In here," she answered. He appeared in the frame a moment later, holding a stack of folded sheets against his stomach. His scrubs were the same hospital navy as hers, but his name badge was worn at the edges, corners bent. He let the sheets drop into a bin and leaned his shoulder against the door, half in, half out, like he was not sure if he was interrupting something sacred. You restock that room like you own the place, he said. It runs smoother when things are where they should be, Nora replied. Sure, Manny said. Just never seen anyone run a pre-mission checklist on a linen cart. She picked up a bundle of small sterile packages and began lining them in the drawer of her cart. Alcohol pads, saline flushes, IV caps. Each one faced the same way. I like knowing what is within reach, she said. Yeah, Manny said. I remember that feeling. There was a beat of quiet between them. The hum of the overhead light filled it. Where were you before here, Quinn? He asked. In school, she said. Bon said. Before that. In another hospital. Manny smiled a little, his eyes did not. Funny thing about hospitals, he said. The ones with concrete walls and no windows, and the ones with gift shops and pastel murals. Still smell the same when the blood hits the floor. Nora slid the drawer shut. We are short on chest tubes, she said, as if he had asked her for a supply report instead of a piece of her history. Someone should call Central before the morning. Manny watched her for another second, then pushed off the door. I will mention it, he said. You let me know if you need an extra set of hands tonight. I am fine, she said. He nodded, although that was not what he had asked. By 2 a.m, the first wave of chaos thinned. Patients who had been stable for hours were either upstairs on wards or tucked beneath warmed blankets, monitors blinking steadily. The scent of coffee refills drifted from the break room. Nora moved through the calmer version of the same space. She checked suction canisters again as if they might have changed in the last hour. She verified that the portable defibrillator at the far end of the hall was still plugged in, fully charged. Tyler Blake walked past her, rubbing his eyes with the back of his wrist. You ever stop, Quinn? He asked. Sometimes I blink, she said. He laughed not unkindly this time and kept going. In room 6, a teenage girl slept in a tangle of ECG wires while her mother scrolled through her phone in the visitor chair. In room 4, a middle-aged man snored softly, his belly rising and falling, heart monitor drawing gentle curves on the screen. Nora dimmed the lights in their rooms by a fraction, just enough to let their pupils rest. Nobody noticed the change. That was the point. At 3, the ER's central heating cycled louder, air blowing through vents with a dry sigh. A light above trauma bay, one flickered, buzzing like an insect. The clock on the wall inched its way forward. Nora slipped into the staff locker room. It smelled of deodorant and damp cotton. A row of gray metal doors lined one side. Her locker sat 3 from the end, number 27 chipped near the latch. She dialed in her code and opened it. Inside, her spare scrubs were folded in a neat stack. A pair of running shoes sat on the bottom shelf, soles wiped clean. On the top ledge, next to a small bottle of unscented lotion and a pack of gum, lay a coin. She picked it up between thumb and forefinger. It was heavier than it looked, about the size of a 50-cent piece, edges ridged. The metal was worn smooth where fingers had traced it over and over. On one side, a trident and an eagle rose from a wave. On the other, a unit name encircled Latin words that most people here would not bother to look up. She balanced it on the first knuckle of her index finger and flipped it once. The coin spun, caught the locker room light, then landed in her palm with a soft clink. Her mind filled uninvited with different sounds. Rotor blades hacking the air, sand slamming against metal, a man shouting for a medic over the high whine of incoming rounds, people cursing into radio's voices, clipped, breathless breaths cut off. Her heart gave one hard thud, her jaw locked. Then she exhaled slowly, a controlled release like turning a valve. She slid the coin back into its place, closed the locker, and pressed her forehead briefly against the cool metal. When she stepped outside, the ER felt louder again. Someone argued at triage about wait times. Somewhere a child started to cry, thin and high. A television in the waiting room talked about snow in the foothills and a low-pressure system moving across the state, little white icons drifting across a graphic of the interstate. Nora checked the trauma bays one more time. Fresh linens folded, gloves stocked in 4 sizes, trauma shears gleaming in their slots. The crash cart drawers closed their locks intact. She tugged on her gloves. The elastic hugged her wrists. The soft snap echoed inside her skull more than in the corridor. As she pulled her cart away from the wall, the overhead speaker pinged. Code triage, incoming ambulance, ETA 5 minutes. The nurse at the central desk looked up. Quinn, she called. We might need extra hands again. Nora adjusted her grip on the cart handle. I'm around, she said. Ed. She turned toward the ambulance bay, footsteps steady, the grid of the department clear in her mind. Each point of light ready for whatever would step through the doors. The ambulance siren wound down as it backed into the bay. Fluorescent light from inside the ER caught on the wet shine of the bumper on the thin crust of snow still clinging to the tires. The door swung open with a hollow metal thud. Cold air rushed in ahead of the stretcher. Nora stood at the inner doors with 2 other nurses, gloves already on a disposable gown hanging loose at her sides. The smell of exhaust slipped around the edges of the usual bleach and coffee. The EMTs rolled the gurney in fast. The man on it wore torn camouflage pants and a dark shirt that had once been part of a uniform. The fabric was shredded across his chest, and there was dust ground into the weave that did not belong to Colorado. It clung to his skin, a pale tan powder that looked like it had traveled a long way to end up here. Dried blood stiffened the cloth over his ribs. Fresh blood crept around the edges of a dressing that had been taped down in a hurry. Male, about 40, the paramedic said, voice clipped from the run. Blast exposure in a training facility per report. Possible fall after. Decreased breath sounds on the right. We needle decompressed in the field temp fix. Tachycardic borderline hypotensive. Klein stepped in on the other side, snapping on a fresh pair of gloves. Name, he asked. Ethan Cole, the paramedic answered. Military liaison on site, that is all they gave us. They transferred Ethan to the trauma bed. The paper sheet crinkled under his weight. He let out a rough sound when they moved him, more of a growl than a groan, like it hurt to let any air go. His eyes were slit open, pupils dull, not quite focusing. Possible tension pneumothorax on the right, Klein said. I need a chest tube tray set up, now. The nurse beside Nora looked at the floor. The other one glanced at the supply room, and then at her own hands already full with blood pressure cuff and pulse ox. Nora felt her ribs tighten as if someone had wrapped a band around her chest. Her feet carried her half a step into the room before her mind caught up. She could already see the placement on Ethan's side, could feel the angle of the tube in her palm, could smell the antiseptic they would pour over skin that had already known too much dirt. Klein saw the movement. Not you, Quinn, he said sharp without shouting. Crash cart. Make it fast. She swallowed and set her jaw. Yes, doctor. She turned away from the bed toward the red cart at the wall. Her hands moved on instinct keys over a piano. Unlock, pull, assess. The top drawer slid open with a smooth metallic sigh. Inside tubing scalpels, syringes, clamps, masks. She reached for the needle decompression kit first, the one size that matched the field report she had just heard. Her thumb brushed the printed gauge without looking. Her brain liked numbers. It remembered them whether she wanted it to or not. Behind her, the junior doctor at Ethan's side yanked open a wall cabinet. Which one is it? He muttered, fingers fumbling through stacks of supplies. Nora lifted the correct kit from her drawer, broke its seal with a twist, and set it on the stainless steel instrument tray near the head of the bed. She turned it so the opening faced Klein's right hand. The cap pointed the way her mind had already drawn the path. She did this without stepping into his line of sight. She did it the way she would set a tourniquet near a teammate's knee, close enough to grab far enough not to be in the way. She heard the flutter of Ethan's breathing, a ragged back-and-forth air fighting to go somewhere. Klein spun from the cabinet and reached blindly toward the tray. His hand found the kit exactly where it should be. He looked down, startled by how ready it was. Who prepped this? Esto casual? He asked. Nobody answered. The junior doctor was still elbow-deep in the cabinet, awkwardly closing it with one shoulder. The nurses were busy with monitors, with pressure cuffs, with tracing the IV line back to the bag. Nora had already stepped away, pushing the crash cart back along the wall, her eyes fixed on Ethan. She had seen men in fatigues come through this ER before. Fort Carson was not a world away, but there was something in the way this dust sat on his skin, in the way his fingers moved, that did not feel like training. The monitor at his head chirped a high heart rate. His chest rose unevenly under the torn shirt. Nora stood at the flank of the room, just outside the brightest circle of light. Up close, Ethan's face was weathered in a pattern she recognized. Not the streaks of a construction worker or a skier, but the web of fine lines around eyes that had spent too many hours squinting into sun that bounced off stone. Klein cut the shirt away from his chest. The fabric fell back in damp folds, exposing muscle bruises already blooming the small puncture wound where the field needle had gone in. On my count, Klein said, focusing on his landmarks, his gloves slick with prep solution. 3, 2, 1. The room narrowed its attention to the incision site. Ethan's gaze drifted past Klein's coude. It landed on Nora. For a second, they looked at each other across a distance of a few feet and several years. His eyes sharpened. He blinked as if clearing grit that was not actually there, and then he seemed to see around the fluorescent glare around the gowns and masks and modern clean lines. He saw her. His right hand jerked against the sheet. The IV line caught on the rail, stretched tight. He fought through it, fingers clawing at nothing until his knuckles brushed her sleeve. The first 2 attempts slid off the smooth material. The third caught. His hand clamped around her wrist. His grip was hot and stronger than it should have been. His fingers closed over the latex and the bone beneath. The sudden pressure dragged her half a step forward. Ma'am, he rasped, voice shredded. Quinn. The room did not pause for him. Klein still worked, monitor still beeped, nurses still moved. But something in the air seemed to thin. Nora's throat closed for a heartbeat. You are in Mile High General Hospital, she said automatic. You are safe. He shook his head, a tiny movement that tugged his IV line. Not hospital, he whispered. Outpost Sable, sand everywhere, Ramirez down in the street. You ran through it. The way he said it did something sharp behind her ribs. Her wrist under his fingers felt smaller, as if it belonged to someone younger. She tried to pull back gently. You need to let go, she said. His grip tightened. They called you Shade, he said. The word came out in pieces. You remember. You moved like smoke. In, out. I saw you in that alley. You stitched him up with one knee in the gravel, 300 meters under fire just to get there. The junior doctor finally closed the cabinet and turned confused by the strange quiet in the middle of organized noise. A nurse at the foot of the bed frowned. Shade, she said under her breath. What is that? Nora felt heat crawl up the back of her neck. Mr. Cole, she said, keeping her tone level, you are confused. Ethan actually laughed, a broken sound that shook his chest. I was confused then, he said. Not now. He stared at her, really stared past the scrub cap, past the mask tucked under her chin, past the hospital badge. You died in that collapse, he said. His voice grew stronger for that one sentence. They said the roof came down on you. They gave us a ceremony. Folded flag photos on the wall 8 years ago. You were gone. Klein finally looked up from his work. His O2 is low, he snapped. He is hypoxic and delirious. He has no idea who he is talking to. Nurse Quinn has been here for years. Ethan dragged his gaze away from Nora long enough to aim it at Klein. You do not talk to her like that, he said. The growl was back in his throat. You have no idea who is standing in your hallway. His hand shook around Nora's wrist, not from weakness this time, but from effort. You dragged half a squad out of a kill zone. He said the words spilling faster now, as if he needed to outrun something. You had blood up to your elbows, and you were still calling air support while you sutured in the dark. A second nurse, the young one from earlier, whispered to her neighbor. What is Outpost Sable? She asked. Her neighbor shrugged, eyes wide. Manny stood in the doorway, Mop paused watching. His gaze moved from Ethan to Nora and back. Something old and tired in his face broke open just enough for recognition to come through. Nora, he said quietly. She did not look at him. Her eyes were locked on the man on the bed and the dust on his skin that matched the color in the small coin inside her locker. Ethan swallowed throat, working around words. You should not be here, he croaked. You should be a name on a stone. He blinked slowly, fighting the fingers of sleep that trauma and medication were wrapping around his mind. So, why are you standing here, ma'am? He asked. Like a regular nurse? Ethan's question hung in the air for half a second, then the monitor above his head cut through it. The tone sharpened. The numbers on the screen slid downward. Respiration shallow, someone said. Sats dropping. Klein snapped his focus back to the vital signs. Push more oxygen, he ordered. Get respiratory in here. The junior doctor grabbed the laryngoscope with hands that no longer felt like they belonged to him. His fingers slipped on the metal handle glove, squeaking. Sweat darkened the band of his scrub cap at the temples. Let us get an airway secured, Klein said. Now. Nora felt Ethan's hand still locked around her wrist. She could feel the tremor in his grip as his body tried to pull air from a lung that did not want to cooperate. Mr. Cole, she said, you need to focus on breathing. Already did my breathing, he whispered, in the dust. His eyes rolled slightly, lids too heavy, his hand loosened. The monitor beeped faster. The oxygen saturation number dropped another point. Bag him, Klein snapped. The junior doctor pressed the mask over Ethan's face, squeezing the bag too hard, then too soft, cheeks puffing in uneven bursts. Easy, Klein barked. You are not inflating a tire. The junior doctor swallowed and tried to adjust, but his shoulders bunched up tighter. The laryngoscope shook in his other hand. Nora gently pried Ethan's fingers from her wrist and stepped back to the edge of the room. Her back touched the cool metal of the crash cart. Plastic crinkled under someone's shoe, the air felt thicker. The junior doctor moved to intubate. He tipped Ethan's head back and slid the blade into his mouth. His view was nothing but tongue and shadow and the far wall of fear he could not see past. Come on, he muttered. Come on. The blade clicked against teeth. The monitor alarmed louder. Sats, 84, a nurse called out. 82. Ethan's chest barely moved under the torn shirt. His lips had taken on a bluish tinge that did not belong to this room. Klein's jaw tightened. You have 10 seconds, he said. The junior doctor tried to reposition. His hand cramped. His wrist jerked at the wrong moment. The endotracheal tube scraped the back of Ethan's throat without sliding into the trachea. "Let me try again," he prayed. "You are out of time," Klein said. Before he could shove the doctor aside himself, a hand closed around the younger man's forearm. The grip was firm, not rough. It stopped the next attempt in place. "Let go," Nora said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The tone inside it stopped more than the doctor. It clipped the movement out of the air. The junior doctor froze. Klein turned on her. "Quinn, step back," he started. "You are not cleared to intubate." She looked at him. Her eyes were steady and very calm. "If you push that tube again," she said, "you will lose the window." Manny, still by the door, shifted his weight. The nurse at the foot of the bed glanced between them, lips parted. "Sat 79, someone said." The beep became a solid wail. Nora spoke again. "Take off your hand," she told the junior doctor. He looked at Klein. Klein opened his mouth, then closed it again. For one small fraction of a second, he saw what Manny had seen earlier. The angle of her shoulders, the line of her neck, the way her hands did not shake at all. He stepped back. The junior doctor removed his hand like he was letting go of a live wire. Nora took the laryngoscope. The handle felt familiar. The weight settled into her palm in a way nothing in this building ever really had. "Blade size 3, she said quietly. The nurse handed it to her without question, fingers brushing hers. Nora positioned herself at the head of the bed. The room seemed to fold out of her awareness, its edges fading. All that remained was the angle of the jaw, the line of the throat, the way air pushed weakly past tissue that was thinking about giving up. "Head tilt a little more," she said, and someone adjusted the pillow. She opened Ethan's mouth and slid the blade in, not hunting, but going to where she already knew the curve would take her. Her wrist turned with practiced economy, sweeping the tongue aside, lifting just enough to see. "Cordae vocals." White. Right there. She felt the faint give in the tissue in her hand, the small nod of anatomy saying yes. She did not rush. She did not pause. She guided the tube through the cords in one smooth movement, watched it pass the last line and stop it exactly where it needed to be. "Tube in," she said, "bag." The respiratory tech squeezed the bag this time in measured compressions. Ethan's chest rose more evenly. The monitor numbers hesitated, then climbed. 85, the nurse read. 88, 91. The alarm quieted. The beep returned to a rhythm that people in this hallway were used to hearing. The junior doctor stood off to the side, his hands still curled as if gripping invisible tools. His face had gone slack. "Where did you learn to move like that?" he asked. Nora slipped the laryngoscope out and set it on the tray, her hands already reaching for tape to secure the tube. "A long time ago," she said. Klein stared at her. The room made room for his surprise, then for something else that crept in behind it. He opened his mouth. Nora had already stepped away, wiping her gloves on a towel as she moved. Ethan's eyes were closed now. His chest rose in steady, obedient motion to the rhythm of the bag. "Get him up to CT," Klein said, voice lower, "then ICU." The team around the bed loosened tension, sliding into the routine of transport. Lines were secured, monitors were clipped to rails, the bed was unlocked. "Watch that IV pole," Manny said automatically. As Nora and another nurse pushed the bed toward the hallway, the wheel caught on the edge of a floor mat. Ethan's weight shifted. Nora reached out to steady the side rail. Her sleeve pulled up an inch. The fabric of her inner scrub top dragged against the metal. Something hidden underneath caught the light. A small rectangular patch had been sewn into the inside of the sleeve. The stitching was old, the edges frayed. The tan background had faded from sun and wash cycles, but the black lettering still clung. U.S. Navy. NSOCM. Combat Medic. LTCMDR N. Quinn. The nurse on the other side of the bed saw it. She stopped walking for half a step. "What is that?" she breathed. Nora tugged her sleeve back down without looking at it. "Keep him moving," she said. They rolled the bed out of the bay and down the hall, the wheels squeaking at a familiar rhythm. The ICU door swallowed Ethan and the team with him. The sound of their passage faded. Nora turned back toward the up. For a moment, the department was between storms. The noise dropped to murmur level. Someone laughed weakly by the nurse's station at a joke that was not very funny. A phone rang twice and was answered. Nora walked toward the small alcove between the trauma bays, the place where they kept extra gowns and a metal cart with wrapped instrument sets waiting to be unwrapped. She reached for a tray, peeled the sterile wrap back part way, and checked the indicator strip out of habit. The color had changed properly. No compromise. She set the tray back. Her hand shook once so briefly that a person looking at her from across the hall would have missed it. She curled her fingers around the edge of the metal cart until the tremor stopped. Manny stepped into the alcove. He did not bring his mop this time. "That was not your first airway," he said. "Of course not," she answered. "I work in an ER." He gave her a look. "That was not an ER airway." She did not reply. Before he could say more, the building itself interrupted. At first, it was just a low vibration underfoot, like a heavy truck hitting a pothole nearby. A cup on the counter trembled, the liquid inside shivering against the styrofoam. Then the sound came. A deep engine roar pushed through the walls from outside. Not one engine, several. It rose and layered with a second noise, a heavy chopping that everyone who watched movies would have recognized even if they had never felt it in their bones. The overhead lights rattled slightly in their mounts. Dust shook loose from somewhere in the ceiling. "What the hell?" the nurse at triage said, looking up. Nora stepped out into the main hallway. Through the glass doors at the far end, blue and white lights stuttered across the parking lot. Headlights, flashers. Shadows of high profiles moved past taller than private cars or ambulances. The chopping grew louder. The windows thrummed in their frames. Someone pushed the doors open. A rush of cold air carried in the smell of jet fuel in winter. Outside, lined up at an angle that blocked the main drive, were several vehicles that did not belong to the hospital. The nearest was a tan armored truck with a blunt nose and narrow windows. Its sides were scarred and thick. Behind it another, and another. Beyond those higher up, the dark shape of a helicopter hovered just above the parking structure rotor wash, kicking up loose snow and swirling ghosts. Snow and trash whipped across the asphalt. Nurses at the window covered their faces with their hands, eyes wide. "Are those military trucks?" someone asked. "Looks like it," Manny said. "What are they doing here?" another voice said. Nobody had the answer. The lead vehicle's door opened. A man climbed down, one hand on the metal rung, the other on the edge of the frame. He straightened into the wash of light. He wore a heavy navy blue coat over a uniform whose neatness survived even the rough ride. His hair was graying at the temples, cut close. His boots hit the pavement with the sure thud of someone who had never learned to walk any other way. He strode toward the entrance. Two figures in darker uniforms flanked him, their faces impassive. The automatic doors hissed open before him. Cold air spilled into the lobby. The man stepped across the threshold, scanned once, took in triage security waiting room line of sight to the back. His gaze found Nora in 3 seconds. "Attention," he said, and his voice filled the space without needing a speaker. "We are here for Lieutenant Commander Nora Quinn, codename Shade." The word landed like a dropped instrument. Conversation stopped. The television in the waiting room chattered on about barometric pressure, but nobody heard it. Heads turned. Triage, nurses' station. Even the family members in plastic chairs looked up and followed the line of his sight. It settled on Nora. She stood halfway down the corridor, gloved hands resting on the handle of her cart scrub top, plain navy badge clipped to her chest. Her heart pounded once against her ribs, then again. It did not change her face. Behind her, Klein stepped forward, eyes wide. "Commander," he said under his breath. The man in the navy coat walked toward Nora. When he was close enough that he no longer needed volume, his tone shifted. He stopped exactly 1 arm's length away. His spine straightened the last fraction that had been relaxed. Then he lifted his right hand to his temple and saluted. He held the salute. The ER fell into a kind of silence it had never known. Not the gap between alarms, not the pause after a code. A complete stilling of everything that was not respiratory function or the hum of vents. Nora did not move for a moment. Her eyes flicked past him over his shoulder to the helicopter shadow drifting outside, to the vehicles in the lot, to the faces behind glass. Then she answered the salute. Her hand rose slower than his, but just as precise. They held that pose mirror images for a long 10 count, while everyone in Mile High General watched and understood slightly more than they had the minute before. The man dropped his hand first. "Commander Quinn," he said. His voice was lower now. "I am Colonel David Rourke, Naval Special Operations Command. We have a situation. We need you." For a moment, nobody in the ER moved. Nora stood facing Colonel Rourke, gloved hands still on the cart handle. Her badge caught the overhead light, the plastic shining over the plain print of her name. "What situation?" she asked. Rourke kept his voice low now, but it carried to the nurse's station and the triage desk. People pretended to busy themselves with charts and keyboards while their ears tilted toward him. "Forward element of SEAL Team 6, he said. "Outside Al-Kharif. Hostile ground, unstable structures, limited air support window." His eyes did not leave Nora. 3 critical casualties on site, more walking wounded. Extraction is delayed. They will not make it to a surgical facility alive without someone directing the next hour. "We have surgeons," Klein said, stepping closer. "We have trauma attendings. We can put someone on a call." Rourke glanced at him only briefly. "You have excellent staff," he said. House said. "What you do not have is a combat medic who has run live fire remote triage, who understands both the medicine and the tactics, and who already owns the trust of every man in that unit." His gaze returned to Nora. "They know your voice," he said. "They will move when you tell them to move." The words laid themselves along the hallway like another set of floor tiles. Nora felt all the eyes on her without looking around. She heard the quiet shift of shoes, the faint squeak of a chair as someone sat down slowly. "I'm a nurse here," she said. "I work nights. I stock crash carts and fix small things." "You do all of that," Rourke agreed. "And 8 years ago you crawled into a collapsed building at Outpost Sable when everyone else was backing away." A muscle in her cheek twitched. "You should not talk about that here," she said. "With respect, Commander," he replied, "here is exactly where I should talk about it." Tyler Blake stood halfway between the nurse's station and the lobby stethoscope still looped around his neck. His usual half-smile was gone. He looked younger than he had an hour ago. "I told her this was not a missile silo," he said under his breath. The nurse beside him did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on Nora. Klein swallowed once. "If what he is saying is true," he said, his voice forced level, "there is protocol, documentation, credentials." Manny made a small sound in his throat. It was not quite a laugh, not quite the opposite. "That patch on her sleeve is a documentation fence," he said quietly. "Just a different kind than your files." Rourke nodded once as if Manny had signed off on something. "We have a temporary command station set up in the lead vehicle," he told. He told Nora. "Live feed from drones, real-time SATCOMs, corpsman on the ground, but he is out of his depth. They need someone who has seen this kind of collapse before and can tell them where to cut, where not to step, who to move first." Nora stared past him through the glass doors. Snow swirled in small white ghosts under the wash of the helicopter blades. The parking lot lights turned the night into a flat gray. "I came here to work with civilians," she said, "to take care of old lungs and sprained ankles and stupid bar fights." A paramedic at the back let out a soft breath at the word stupid. He looked at his boots. Rourke did not move. "And you do that," he said. "You do it very well. I am not here to pull you out of this life. I am here to ask for one shift, one operation. Then we will bring you back to your crash carts and your broken ankles and your old lungs." Silence settled again deeper this time. A man in a visitor chair in the waiting room leaned forward, hands clasped. He did not understand the details, but he felt the weight in the way people stood. Nora looked at Manny. His eyes met hers and held them. He had the expression of someone who had already seen the answer on a test and was waiting for the student to write it down. "If you walk out that door," he said softly, "you are not doing it for them. You are doing it for the ones on the ground who keep screaming for a medic." Her fingers tightened on the cart handle. Then she let go. She looked down at her gloves. Latex stretched over her knuckles, dusted with disinfectant and the faint trace of someone else's blood. With slow, deliberate movements, she caught the edge of one glove at the wrist and peeled it off. The material turned inside out as it came away, making a quiet, rubbery snap. She did the same with the other hand. The air against her bare skin felt colder than the lobby. She dropped both gloves into the nearest biohazard bin. For a second, her hands hung empty at her sides. She reached up and pulled off her scrub cap, fingers sliding through flattened hair as it fell back against her neck. She folded the cap once and pressed it into Manny's chest. "Keep that clean," she said. "I am coming back for it." His fingers closed around the fabric. Klein stepped close, guilt swimming up under the adrenaline. "Nora," he began. She turned her head toward him. "Clean the needle kits properly," she said. "Check your suction twice. Seconds matter." Her words were not loud. The way she said them made a path through every person within listening distance. Blake took a step back to give her room. As Nora walked down the hallway toward the front doors, staff shifted out of her path without quite realizing they were moving. Some straightened their backs. Others dropped their gaze. The sound of her shoes on the floor was almost inaudible under the helicopter and engines, but everyone heard it. When she reached the threshold, the cold air wrapped around her like water. The rotor wash tugged at her scrub top, pulled a strand of hair loose from its knot. Snow stung the edges of her cheeks. Outside, the armored vehicles idled in a low, steady rumble. Figures in gear stood near them, watching her with a focus that did not belong to this building. One of them, a younger sailor with a headset crooked over one ear, snapped to attention as she approached. There was something like relief in the tight line of his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, voice almost lost in the wind. Nora did not answer. She climbed into the open door of the lead truck after Rourke, one hand on the cold metal grab bar. The interior smelled of electronics and oil and the faint sourness of men who had been sitting too long with nerves held tight. The door closed behind her with a heavy, echoing clap. Inside the ER, the sound came through as a dull thud. The helicopter lifted a little higher. Snow scattered in frantic spirals. The vehicles began to turn, engines groaning against their own weight. Staff pressed to the windows, watched the small convoy organize itself and roll toward the exit. The black shape above them banked and followed. The noise of the engines faded by degrees, leaving a vacuum that the usual sounds of the department were slow to fill. For a few beats, the ER felt like an unplugged machine. The television in the waiting room talked about sports scores. Someone coughed. A chair squeaked. At the nurse's station, Blake sat down hard. I told her she had OCD about a crash cart, he said, staring at the empty space where the cart usually sat when Nora was not pushing it. The young nurse beside him wiped at her eyes with the back of her wrist. I asked around about her last week, she said. People said she was too quiet. Klein leaned both hands on the counter, head bowed between his shoulders. His white coat had a small smear of Ethan Cole's blood near the cuff. I took an airway from her, he said into the wood grain. I told her to wait for orders. Manny rested Nora's scrub cap on the desk. It sat there like a small folded flag. You did what you knew how to do, he said. Now you know a bit more. Klein sank into a chair. For the first time that night, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with hours. Around them, the department began to move again. Triage called back another patient. An orderly pushed an empty stretcher toward the bays. An overhead chime announced a phone call for radiology. The ER resumed its rhythm, but there was a new hesitation in the way people spoke to one another. Orders were phrased with a little more care. Requests came with eye contact. At the far end of the hall, Mr. Carter in bed 9 watched two nurses adjust his IV pole, together both of them saying, please and thank you, like they meant it. He did not know why the atmosphere felt different. He only knew that it did. Manny walked to the supply room and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the neatly aligned boxes, the Sharpie lines, the cleared floor space. The systems Nora had built held firm in her absence. He reached up and straightened a single box that had shifted half an inch during the last rush. We will keep it standing, he said quietly to no one in particular. Then he went back to his mop shoulder set, listening with half an ear for the sound of rotors that might one day come back. The night thinned out after the convoy left. Calls still came in. People still bled, coughed, complained, slept. The ER did what it always did. Yet underneath the usual rhythm, there was a second pulse, a quiet waiting that ran from one end of the department to the other. A television in the staff break room played the local news on low volume. Weather, traffic, a human interest piece about a lost dog that found its way home. No one paid attention until the anchor's voice shifted and a graphic of a desert map appeared over her shoulder. Unconfirmed reports of a military operation near the Al-Kharif region surfaced tonight, she said. Details are scarce at this time. Manny stood in the doorway with a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hand. Blake sat at the small table, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the tiny screen. Two nurses leaned against the counter, arms folded. The footage was generic. Archive clips of helicopters crossing a sky brown with dust, troops in silhouette, no names. The anchor moved on, sports, then a pharmaceutical commercial with smiling actors. The room exhaled together a sound made of worry and something like hope. Near 3 a.m, the charge nurse's phone buzzed in her pocket. She frowned at the number one she did not recognize and stepped to the side to answer. Emergency department, this is Karen. Her spine straightened slowly as she listened. Her eyes flickered up toward the ceiling and then across the room to Manny. Understood, she said. Yes, I will pass that along. She hung up and walked into the break room. Everyone there went quiet without needing a signal. That was administration, she said. They just got a secure message from a naval operations center. Her fingers tightened on the phone once before she relaxed them. Forward element of a special operations team was extracted from an unstable structure near Al-Kharif, she continued. 6 personnel alive and secure. 3 critical stable enough for transport. Blake swallowed. Who coordinated it? He asked, although he already knew. Karen looked down at the message on her screen and read aloud. Remote triage and command oversight by Lieutenant CMDR Nora Quinn and SOCM, mission complete. The words hung there for a moment, then settled into the tile and the old coffee smell and the hum of the vending machine. Manny lifted his cup a little as if toasting someone who could not see him. In one piece, he said. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. The reaction came instead in loosening shoulders, in the way breath came out of tight chests, in the new quiet between sentences as people went back to work. Someone turned the volume up on the television a notch. The anchors kept talking about other things. The world outside the hospital rotated on its own axis. Inside Mile High, General finished another shift. 7 nights later, snow fell in softer flakes. The ambulance bay lights reflected in shallow puddles instead of frozen patches. A pale sun had gone down an hour earlier, leaving the sky a flat, dark blue. Just before the night shift changed, the staff entrance chimed. The door opened with its usual automatic sigh. Nora stepped through, a canvas backpack on one shoulder. Her scrub top was the same navy blue. Her ID badge hung from the same clip. Her hair was gathered into the same low knot. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she had dreamed the convoy, the truck the drone feeds the voices shouting over static from halfway around the world. Then she saw the way the hallway changed shape around her. Manny was the first to stand. He straightened from where he had been filling a mop bucket and set the handle carefully against the wall. Karen looked up from the charge desk and rose without thinking. Klein pushed his chair back. Blake, halfway through writing a note, set his pen down. One by one, people inside of the entrance got to their feet. Nurses, techs, an EMT with his winter jacket half on. Even the clerk at registration stepped back from her keyboard. They did not snap to attention. They did not salute. They simply stood and faced her, a row of different ages and shapes in hospital blue and white. For a second, Nora almost turned around as if they were looking at someone behind her. Then Karen stepped forward. "Welcome back, Nora," she said. The words were simple. The tone made them feel like something more. Heat rose along Nora's throat into her cheeks. "It is just a shift," she said. "I am on the board for nights." Klein came closer. His expression held none of the hurried impatience it usually carried at the start of an evening. "You are on the board," he agreed. "And you are also the most experienced field medic any of us have met. Both can be true." She did not argue this time. Blake approached with less swagger than usual, hands, empty shoulders set. "I am sorry," he said. The words sounded awkward in his mouth, as if he had not practiced them enough. "About the crash cart jokes, about all of it." Nora looked at him for a moment. "Organize it however you like," she said. "Just know where everything is when the power goes out." He let out a short, startled laugh and nodded. "We can work on that," he said. Karen gestured toward the central desk. "There is something on your cart," she said. Nora walked into the main corridor. The medication cart she usually pushed sat parked where she always left it. On top of it rested a small box wrapped in brown paper, the kind used for shipping supplies. A strip of tape held a folded index card in place. Her name was written on it in Manny's careful block letters. She peeled the tape back and opened the box. Inside lay a pair of trauma shears, new, heavier than the standard ones. The metal handles were smooth under her fingertips. Someone had taken the time to have them engraved. The first word was in all caps, shade. Underneath, smaller, the hospital logo had been etched a simple mountain outline above the letters MHG. On the card in the same block, print a single sentence waited. "Thank you for not giving up on us." There was no signature, but she saw half a dozen different handwritings in the way the letters overlapped, small corrections and darkened strokes where someone had gone over a line twice. She closed the shears, listened to the clean click of the blades, then slid them into the side pocket of the cart where her old pair had lived. "They fit," she said. Manny watched from the corner of the hallway. "We thought they might," he replied. Later, during the thin hour between midnight and dawn, when most of the current patients were either sleeping or sedated, Nora found her way up to the roof. The door to the stairwell was heavy. It groaned as she pushed it open. Cold air met her face. The city stretched out in light patterns below, streets running like veins through blocks of shadow. Red tail lights moved slow on the interstate in the distance. She stepped to the low wall and rested her hands on the rough concrete. The night wind worked its way through the fabric of her scrub top, found the heat at the back of her neck. A sound reached her faint and higher than the traffic. The chop of rotor blades passed somewhere far off, not directly overhead, but near enough to catch. A small dot moved against the darker sky, then faded into the clouds. She watched it go until it disappeared. Footsteps approached behind her, soft rubber soles on concrete. Manny joined her at the wall, holding 2 steaming paper cups. He handed one to her. "Decaf," he said. "Yes, he bet I was feeling optimistic." She wrapped her hands around the warmth. "You have been up here before," he said. "Back before all of this?" "I like the air, folk," she replied. "It is easier to think when I'm above the monitors." They stood there for a while, not talking. The night filled in around them. Somewhere below, an ambulance siren started up, distant and lonely. "You know they will never look at you the same way again," Manny said eventually. Nora took a sip. The coffee was bad the way hospital coffee usually was. It tasted familiar. "I know," she said. "You good with that?" She watched her breath leave her mouth in small white clouds and fade. "I am good with being all of it," she said. "The medic they buried and the nurse who shows up at 7. He nodded as if that answer matched something in his own head. They finished their coffee in silence. When the cups were empty, they went back down the stairs, one after the other. In the locker room, Nora opened number 26. Her spare scrubs sat where she had left them. The coin was still on the top shelf. She moved it aside and reached to the back of the locker. Folded, there was the inner scrub top she had worn the night Ethan Cole came in. The faint outline of the patch pressed against the fabric from the inside. She turned the sleeve and slipped her fingers under the hem. The tan rectangle still held threads, a little more frayed letters, a little more softened but legible. U.S. Navy. NSOCM. Combat Medic. LTCMDR N. Quinn. She did not cut it out. She smoothed the fabric over it and set the top back in place, then grabbed her current scrub shirt and pulled it on the cotton, sliding over skin that felt more settled than it had in years. At the sink, she took a fresh pair of gloves from the box. She worked her fingers into them, one hand, then the other. The latex snapped against her wrists, that small sound she had always listened for. Somewhere along the line, it had changed from a cover to a signal, not hiding, just starting. She stepped back into the hallway, pushed her cart away from the wall, and headed toward the bright mouth of the ER. Monitors beeped. Somebody called her name. A new set of footsteps approached the doors from the ambulance bay. Nora adjusted her grip on the handle. It was another night, another shift, another field. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.